Thank you for joining our public service loan forgiveness webinar. We are going to give it just a couple minutes for folks to continue to trickle in here. Thanks for joining and hang tight, and we will get started a couple minutes past the top of the hour. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to, or good evening, and welcome to the latest installment of SBPC's workshop on accessing debt cancellation for public service workers. We are going to get rolling in just a minute, but I did want to start by saying hello and thank you guys for joining. My name is Mike Pierce. I'm the Executive Director of the Student Borrower Protection Center, and I'm going to be taking you through everything that you need to know about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, recent changes to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and the limited opportunity to be able to get your debts canceled if you work in public service. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the very exciting announcement a month ago that President Biden is going to cancel up to $20,000 worth of student debt for nearly every American that has a federal student loan, with some recent exceptions that are a bit of a challenge. So I am going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about it at the end. I'm also going to note how those recent changes interact with the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program a couple different times during this presentation today. It looks like we now have a whole bunch of people online, and with that, we're going to jump into it. So the purpose of this presentation today is to talk about both the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program as it was designed, and also recent changes announced in October of last year by the Biden administration that have already canceled the debts for more than 200,000 public service workers across the country and have given additional credit towards Pslf for more than 2 million people. As you all know, and particularly those of you that are an older borrower like me that have been trying to work your way through the system for a long time, this hasn't always worked for folks. And in fact, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program has been the very model of how government should work. And it's resulted in hundreds of thousands of public service workers across the country missing out on their right to debt cancellation. So I'm going to start today by talking about what the law says, how the program was intended to work, and how it worked in practice for the first 14 years it existed. And then I'm going to talk about this limited opportunity to have your debt canceled that was announced in by the Biden administration in October of last year that runs out at the end of this month. I am going to give you many warnings that this runs out at the end of this month, and that this is your last chance to get lots and lots of credit for the time you've spent working in public service, going back all the way to 2007. And then I'm going to talk about how this interacts with all of these other benefits and protections that the Biden administration has announced, particularly the president's commitment to cancel up to $20,000 of the student debt for everybody. So with that, I want to jump into the weeds. What is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program? And actually, I'm sorry, before I do this, I should also note, we are going to do lots of Q&A at the end of this. So please drop your questions into the Q&A box in Zoom. We are going to go through as many of them as we can at the conclusion of this presentation, but we have lots and lots and lots of information on forgivemystudentdebt.org. That's forgivemystudentdebt.org. That is a resource that we publish along with American Federation of Teachers, the National Education Association, AFSCME, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the National Association of Social Workers, the American Association of University Professors. This is a big labor and professional association table that we have built to help connect working people across the country with their right to get their debt canceled. That is forgivemystudentdebt.org. Everything that I cover today exists on forgivemystudentdebt.org, including short instructional videos that cover each of the segments of this presentation and dozens of frequently asked questions about both the president's recent commitment to cancel up to $20,000 of student debt and the public service loan forgiveness program and these changes we're going to talk about today. So again, forgivemystudentdebt.org, I will mention that many times today. But anything I jump over, anything that seems complicated, anything that you watched a bit of extra information on, it already exists on the internet for free as a result of this website that we have been gradually adding to for almost a year now. So with that, I am going to jump into how this program was designed and how it works under the law, and then I'll talk about how that's changed. So in 2007, Congress passes the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. This is at the time, the broadest student loan debt relief program the Congress had ever enacted. It offers complete debt cancellation for anyone who does these four things over the course of 10 years. And 10 years later, in exchange for a decade of public service, the balance of your loan is supposed to be canceled. This program was created in 2007 and signed by President Bush and enjoyed bipartisan support for most of its history. But it never worked as intended. And that's because this set of requirements that I'm going to talk through real quick really were implemented in a way that tripped folks up over and over and over again. And that was paired with a student loan industry that routinely provided incorrect information to folks, or worse, engaged in schemes to deny people their right to get their debt canceled. And the weight of those industry abuses and government mismanagement meant that 99 out of every 100 public service workers who tried to navigate this process was not able to do so successfully. And I'll talk more about what that means and how that presented us with this opportunity to do better. But just know that this is going to seem complicated. The law is complicated. The implementation is worse, and it's not your fault. If you've tried this before, you couldn't make heads or tails of it, you got told wrong information, you got told to take a walk, that's because the system just wasn't designed to succeed, and public service workers across the country were cut out of their right to debt relief. So what did the law say? The law says that you have to have the right type of loan. That's a federal direct loan, a loan made directly by the US Department of Education. It says that you have to enroll in the right type of payment plan. For most people, most of the time, that's a payment plan where you make payments based on your income, known as an income-driven repayment plan. You have to have the right type of employment. That's working for any public service organization. And I'll talk more in a second about what that means. And then do that, all three of those things: right type of loan, right type of repayment plan, right type of employment, every month for 120 months. Doesn't need to be consecutive, but it does need to total up to 120 months, which is 10 years of public service work. So I'm going to walk through each of these things individually. Note that this has gotten much easier temporarily because of the exciting things that are going on in the Biden administration I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But this is how the law is structured. So I mentioned before, only federal direct loans are eligible for public service loan forgiveness. If you're lucky enough that the only loans you borrowed after 2010, probably all you have are federal direct loans. But for older borrowers like me that went to college a while ago, you took out a federal student loan from a bank or from Sallie Mae. My lender was Citibank. And those loans were guaranteed by the federal government. They don't count for public service loan forgiveness, but they can count if you know to take some extra steps. If you consolidate those loans into a new direct loan, you could then get credit towards public service loan forgiveness. Some people did this, many people didn't. And up until this new announcement that I'm going to talk about in just a second, those borrowers were told that they just lost credit for any progress they had made, any time they served in public service before they consolidated. And so if you didn't take that step immediately, as soon as your career started, you were not getting credit, and you couldn't get credit towards public service loan forgiveness. We're going to talk a lot about consolidation. We're going to talk a lot about what it means for borrowers with FFELP loans. We're going to even talk about what it means for those borrowers and how it relates to this new debt cancellation the president announced in August. Stay with us. We're going to get to all of that. But just know that what the law says, the way it was written in 2007, is if you don't consolidate, you don't get credit. Borrowers with Parent Plus loans can also qualify under the law. They are eligible for public service loan forgiveness, But you also have to consolidate those loans, even if they're direct loans, because that's the only way you can enroll in an income-driven repayment plan and actually maximize your debt cancellation here. And so we'll talk about that now for a second. You have to enroll in the right type of payment plan. That means income-driven repayment for most people. I know that's jargon. If you've never heard of income-driven repayment, don't worry about it. But basically all it means is that you're making payments based on how much money you make every year, not how much debt you owe. And if you make very little money or you're unemployed, your payments can be as low as $0 per month, and the government considers that making a payment towards public service loan forgiveness. You could also enroll in the 10-year standard repayment plan, but as you might imagine, if you make 10 years worth of repayments while enrolled in a 10-year payment plan, you're going to pay off your loans and there won't be any debt left to cancel. So it counts, but it doesn't actually help you get debt cancellation. There are other payment plans you might have been advised to enroll in, particularly if you are an older borrower like me that graduated a long time ago and was still paying their loans back when public service loan forgiveness was created. There was a lot of bad information out there, and people were told to enroll in these so-called extended or graduated repayment plans. And they followed the advice of their student loan company, and they missed out on credit towards student loan payments. We're going to talk a lot about that today. And we're going to talk about what changed that lets you get credit now, even though the law says you can't. I would also note that when you consolidate, if you do have one of those older loans that needs to be turned into a new direct loan, you do have the option to enroll in a qualifying payment plan as part of that application. You can choose to enroll in income-driven repayment, so you can start on the right track. We're going to talk about that again. We're going to walk through step by step how you do that if you have one of those older loans, so just stick with me. You also need the right type of employment. And the key to this program, the reason that so many people qualify, a quarter of the US labor market works for an employer that counts for Pslf. The reason that's true is because it is any government agency, so any federal, state, or local government agency, any 501c3 nonprofit. It doesn't matter what you do for those employers, any branch of the US military too. It just matters that you work for an organization the government recognizes as a public service organization. So that means you could be a teacher in the classroom. It also means you could be a lawyer in a school district general counsel's office. You don't have to be providing frontline services to folks. You just need to work for an employer the government recognizes. And we'll talk about how you confirm that your employer is eligible in just a moment. But just note that in addition to those kind of categorical employers that we know are eligible because of what kind of employer they are, governments, the military, school districts, nonprofits. Other nonprofits can qualify, not just 501c3s. And so there are other kinds of nonprofits that are incorporated differently. And you see that often in the healthcare industry. Also some school districts, some colleges. Those nonprofits can qualify as long as they're providing a specific list of services that the law specifies. And that does include public health and healthcare, that includes education. We also see this often in early childhood education. But it does still have to be a nonprofit. For-profit companies never count. You also have to be working full-time. That means the greater of 30 hours a week or your employer's definition of a full-time job. And we hear from lots of folks that get stuck in this gray area here who work more than 30 hours a week, but they can't get their employer to sign their forms because their employer doesn't consider them to be a full-time employee for the purposes of benefits or retirement or healthcare. The law doesn't care whether or not you get health insurance from your employer. The law doesn't care about whether your employer offers you retirement benefits. All the law cares about is whether your employer is willing to say, with respect to Pslf only, we consider you a full-time employee. So this is free money for you. It is great for your employer to help you out here. You need to get them comfortable with this idea that you could be a full-time employee only for this purpose, and that's okay. We talk to employers all the time that are trying to work through that decision-making process, but at the end of the day, most conclude that it's better to do the thing that's friendly for workers to help them get their debt canceled than it is to be resistant here, because it costs them nothing to be able to sign on the dotted line and help you get your debt canceled. The other thing I would note is that you do need to work full-time, but you can do that by combining multiple part-time jobs, as long as in total it adds up over 30 hours per week. We see this a lot in healthcare, where folks might work for multiple hospitals. We see this a lot in higher education, where adjunct faculty might teach for multiple colleges. The Department of Education has a process for this. You just fill out a different form for each of your employers and then add them up where there's overlapping periods of service. It works. It's not that hard. But just know that working multiple part-time public service jobs is not a barrier to getting your debt canceled. You need to do these things. You need to have the right kind of loan. You need to be enrolled in the right kind of payment plan. You need to work for a qualified organization full-time. Every month, you have to do those things. As long as you're doing those three things every month and making payments on your student loan, that month counts towards public service loan forgiveness. Do that 120 times and the government will cancel your debt. The law says and the rules say those payments need to be made in full. Those payments need to be made on time. And you can't pay in advance beyond a year early on your payments. You can pay a year ahead, but you can't pay beyond that. So for folks that write one big check a year on their student loans because their employer helps them out or because they have a family member providing support, just know that you can only pay 12 months worth of payments in advance. So this is what the law says. This is how it worked for the first 14 years of the program, more or less. Some of the stuff was changed at the margins over that time. It's not how it works right now. Because of this limited waiver. It's not how this works for just the next few weeks. It's much, much simpler. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so walking through these changes, how much simpler this is for folks, how we went from a place where only 10,000 people got their debts canceled under this scheme over the course of 14 years, and 200,000 people have had their debts canceled in just 10 months. In total, more than 2 million people have had some credit towards public service loan forgiveness due to the changes that I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So just know that everything I said was technical. Everything I said is how the law works. This is the baseline we're going to build off of today, but it's not necessary that you get all these details right as long as you take action in the next month. The other thing I would note is that you don't have to be making payments right now if your loan is owned by the federal government. If your payments have been paused due to COVID, which is the majority of people with student debt, you still need to meet the other criteria for Pslf. You have to be working full-time in a public service job. But those periods where you've been paused because of the pandemic count towards public service loan forgiveness. That means that the vast majority of public service workers with student debt have received nearly 3 years of credit towards Pslf without making a single payment. Payments are scheduled to remain paused through at least December. That's been extended 7 times since 2020. It may get extended again, it may not. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end here, but just know that even if payments resume in January, everyone that works in public service has received 34 months, nearly 3 years worth of credit towards public service loan forgiveness without ever having to pay a bill. That's a big deal. It means that you only have 7 more years of payments left to get your debt canceled outright, even if you were just starting your career off at the beginning of the pandemic. So I want to talk for just a second about what it means for folks to be stuck with loans that they thought should have been canceled already, to have had the promise of the public service loan forgiveness program made to you, for you to have worked your decade and then to have been told that you don't qualify. This happened to people across the country, and it generated headlines. So when the first people started to be eligible for debt cancellation in 2017, remember the program was created in 2007, so 10 years later is 2017. Those first borrowers raised their hand and said, I want to get my debt canceled. I worked for a decade. I did everything I was told. And 99 out of 100 were told that they don't qualify. People at the time said this is just growing pains. Early in the program, it wasn't well understood. Over time, this will get better. Year after year after year, that denial rate ticked down, but just barely. And so by the time President Biden took office, 98 out of every 100 public service workers were still getting rejected for Pslf. And President Biden ran on a promise to fix this broken public service loan forgiveness program. At the same time, state attorneys general in New York and Massachusetts sued the government's principal contractor for mishandling this program and denying Pslf to a generation of public service workers. A class action brought by members of the American Federation of Teachers sued the student loan giant Navient for steering people away from their rights to get Pslf. There was a broad recognition that this was broken, but not just because the government screwed up, but because the student loan industry systematically cheated people out of their rights. And so when President Biden came into office pledging to fix this mess, one of the first things he did in 2021 was ask public service workers to tell their story, to share what went wrong, how did this fail you, what do we need to do to make things right again. And more than nearly 50,000 people from across the public service workforce shared their stories with the Biden administration and said, make it simple and keep your promise and cancel our debt. And I want to pause on that 50,000 number for just a second. Only 10,000 people got their debt canceled in 14 years. 50,000 people shared their story in 60 days. There was this groundswell of public service workers who did everything they were told and needed help, and the administration listened. And so that gave us what the government has called the time-limited waiver of public service loan forgiveness requirements, or the Pslf waiver, or the limited waiver. This is a name that only government could come up with, and it is a mouthful. But what it means in practice is that a lot of these ticky-tack requirements that we talked about before can be brushed away, and borrowers will get credit for the time that they've worked as long as they have done public service work full-time for a qualifying employer, and they've made payments on some payment plan on some federal student loan. So a lot of the things that have knocked people off track, finding out too late that they had to consolidate, finding out too late that they were enrolled in the wrong payment plan. The Biden administration used existing legal authority and some flexibility that resulted from the fact that we are in a national emergency due to the pandemic, and cleared out those requirements that kept tripping people up and said that for 1 year and 1 year only, if you take some steps to show your intent to get Pslf, we will give you credit and keep our promise to you, and understand that back then you were getting bad information. Back then the government wasn't doing a good job. And from here on out, we're going to do right by you, and we're going to start by making you whole. So what does that mean? That means that unlike the way the law is written, if you consolidate your loans, if you turn an older federal loan made by a bank or made by your school into a new direct loan, you'll get credit for any public service work you did before you made that swap. That's a big deal. That means that a generation of public service workers who have been shut out of this program can now raise their hand and get credit. That's how we're at that number 2 million. That's how 2 million people have been able to get credit for public service loan forgiveness that previously didn't, all during the year this year. And that's how we're at that 200,000 number. That's how 200,000 people have had their debts cleared out completely as a result of these temporary changes. These are mostly older borrowers that have these older loans that raised their hand and said, I want to qualify now, even though the law didn't let them qualify a year ago. There's a warning I'm going to give you right now, again in a couple slides, and one more time at the end. The president announced in August that he is prepared to cancel up to $20,000 worth of student debt for nearly everyone with a federal student loan who doesn't have a very high income. To qualify, if you have one of these older loans, you needed to have consolidated your loans before last week. This was a change in policy. Originally, an open-ended invitation was made to these borrowers to consolidate your loans just like you will for public service loan forgiveness. And you get in line for both programs. Get your debt canceled because the president's canceling debt for everybody. Get your debt canceled completely because you work in public service. It all works together. It's a great story. The administration changed the rules on us last week. They did that in advance of a lawsuit brought by Republican attorney general in a bunch of different states, Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, South Carolina, Nebraska, and Arkansas. Those Republican AGs said that these older loans some of them are the property of the states. And as a result, they think the president's effort to cancel $20,000 worth of student debt to nearly everybody is illegal, and that those loans let them challenge it in court. And so the administration, in advance of that onslaught, shut out these borrowers from up to $20,000 for debt relief. I want to say it now, I'm going to say it again, that does not in any way affect the public service loan forgiveness program. There are some things to watch out for. If you have loans the government owns, if you have some direct loans and you have some of these older loans, mixing them together might cause you some trouble. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you just have these older loans and you want to get on track for PSLF, everything that I'm going to tell you today is still true. Everything you would have heard from one of these workshops a month ago is still true. That change in policy on $20,000 worth of debt cancellation has no effect on the public service loan forgiveness program. So stick with me. I'm going to walk you through all of it. Just know that if you have one of these older loans and you're on this webinar right now, you are going to have to consolidate to turn those into a direct loan to get them to get canceled under public service loan forgiveness. And you can still do that. No policy changes affect people working in public service that way. You also need to know that the government now doesn't care what payment plan you were enrolled in. So if you were one of those borrowers who was advised by their student loan company to use the wrong payment plan back in 2008, or 2010, or 2016, the government's counting any payment plan as long as you're making payments. I'm going to talk about what that means for people that paused their payments before the pandemic, for folks that used a deferment or a forbearance back before 2020. There's some wrinkles there, but if you were on any payment plan and you were making payments, you're good to go. If you served in the military and you paused your payments, you're also good to go. Basically, anything any military borrower does at this point is going to count towards public service loan forgiveness. You still need to work in public service. The public service part of public service loan forgiveness is still true. But if you lost your job during the pandemic and you have 10 years of service before, you can apply for PSLF now, as long as you do it by the end of the month. So just know that normally under the law, you have to be working in public service when you raise your hand and say, cancel my student debt, but you don't right now and only for the next few weeks. So I'm going to talk about how you tell the government you want this special treatment for your loans. You don't have to finish the process. You don't have to have your debts canceled by the end of the month. You just have to show the government you want to get in line. And I will tell you how to raise your hand. There's a few different ways to do it. But just know that at this point, at this late hour, as of the first week of October, basically no one who starts the process today is going to get their debt canceled by the end of the month. You just need to get in line. And it might take 6 months. There's a backlog. It might take a year, but it'll eventually happen. And as long as you've raised your hand, you've showed your intent to pursue PSLF under the waiver, the government's going to treat your loans this way. They're not going to look back to the law and knock you out on technicalities. It's important to know this is not completely automatic for most people. There were some borrowers last fall where the government had all the information they needed to cancel their debt because they had a couple different kinds of loans, or they had a consolidation that had some other loans in them, and they had already certified 10 years worth of service. Those borrowers did get their debts canceled automatically. So tens of thousands of people in the fall and winter of 2021 did get their debts canceled without doing anything at all. That's kind of done. That's run its course. Now everybody has to at least raise their hand by the end of this month to be able to get in line. Note that people with these older loans, loans made by banks and other private lenders but backed by the federal government, loans made directly by schools, the Perkins loan program, they're at the biggest risk of missing out because, again, you have to consolidate those loans. You have to turn them into a direct loan for them to be able to be canceled. Doesn't mean you have to have done that at the beginning of your career because of this waiver. You can get credit for all those years of public service work you did before you consolidate, but you do have to take that step. So we're going to talk about what that means and how it works in just a moment. Just know that you have to do something to show the government you want to get in line by the end of this month. Everyone turns into a pumpkin on Halloween. You have to show the government you want to get in line and raise your hand. So now we're going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about how to check to make sure you're eligible and how to raise your hand so the government knows to give you this set of rights under this PSLF waiver. So what do you need to know? You need to know first, if you do actually work for a qualified public service employer, you need to figure out what kind of loans you have because that tells you whether you need to consolidate. And then you need to certify your employment. You need to raise your hand and show the government how many months or years of public service credit you want to get under the waiver. And that means you have to fill out a form that covers all of your public service work that you want to count. If you've been in public service for a long time, that work goes all the way back to October of 2007. You just need to certify 10 years worth of service between October 2007 and today to be able to get your debt canceled outright. Or you just need to certify as much service as you've worked, and you'll get credit towards public service loan forgiveness, and you can finish out that time after payments start up again, probably next year, potentially next year. So Just note that you don't have to be ready to get your debt canceled to benefit from this. Anybody that has any amount of public service work can certify their service right now by the end of this month to get credit. This is particularly beneficial, though, for folks that have old public service work, particularly public service work and a loan that doesn't qualify unless you consolidate. So how do you figure out whether you have a public service employer? I am going to spend a minute walking you step by step through the government's website about how you do this. Just know there's a website. It's called studentaid.gov. We're going to talk about it a bunch now in the next 10 minutes. It is the place where you probably went to fill out your financial aid forms when you went to college. It is also the place that you went to enroll in a different payment plan if you switched payment plans before the pandemic. There's a tool on there called the Pslf help tool. And this is a good example of the government doing something really well. It is an effort by the Department of Education to guide you through this process and help you understand the steps you need to take. It's still a little janky. Sometimes there's problems with it. We'll talk about a couple of those problems today, but it is a great resource and it is the place you go to look up whether your employer is qualified. I do also want to note that if your employer is not there, the government has a process for identifying eligible employers and kind of predetermining whether they count. You can initiate that process in studentaid.gov. It'll tell you it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks, maybe longer, for you to get a response. Some people wait months to get a response. As you might imagine, we're running out of time here. October 31st is way less than 6 weeks away. So if you start this process, that is one of the ways to raise your hand and show the government you intend to pursue public service loan forgiveness. If they have you as someone whose employer determination is pending, you've gotten in line. So I will just note that here. I'll come back to it in a moment. But there is a process here for folks whose government or nonprofit employers are not already in the government's database. You also need to go check what kind of loans you have. If you never took out a student loan before 2010 and you know you only have direct loans, that's most people that took out loans since 2010. You don't have to take these next steps. You can ignore what I'm about to tell you. But if you have one of these older loans, a FEL loan, a federally guaranteed loan, or a Perkins loan made by your school, you will have to consolidate your loans to get credit. And again, consolidating your loans might have this risk of boxing you out of $20,000 for debt cancellation. I'm going to talk about what that means in a few slides, but just know that the recent changes to that broad debt cancellation initiative does not affect your rights under public service loan forgiveness. You can qualify your loans to get PSLF. You also need to certify, you need to tell the government that you have worked in public service, and you need to have your employer verify that you've worked there. Every employer you've worked for, every month of public service work you want to count needs a form that covers that period of work. It can be one form if you've spent your entire career at a single company. It can be 100 forms if you have jumped around jobs or if you combine multiple part-time jobs. Just know that every bit of public service work you want to count towards your 120 payments needs to have a form that covers that period of work in your career. So I'm going to walk through these three things step by step. I'm going to tell you how to confirm that you have an eligible employer. I'm going to tell you how to determine if you have an eligible loan, and if you don't, how to consolidate. And then I'm going to talk to you about how to certify your service. And then we are going to walk through some of the tricks and traps that have knocked people off track. So first, confirming an employer. I'm going to go very quickly through this because the government's website's pretty easy on this. You go to studentaid.gov. You create a credential, so you log in. You can do that in a single sitting. It's really easy. You might already have a login from when you applied for financial aid, or when you checked your account balance, or when you changed your payment plan, or when you consolidated your loans. But if you don't, you can create one. It's not hard. It only takes a few minutes. Once you do this, you go to Public Service Loan Forgiveness, and you open up the Help tool. And what you see is this option to add an employer. Adding an employer allows you to match your employer's identification number, EIN, or tax ID. That is the number that appears on your W-2, might also appear on your paychecks. It's how the IRS classifies your employer. If you include your EIN here, you'll get a ping, and it will say the government recognizes your employer. All this means is that somebody before you worked for that same employer and has had their service certified by the government. So I mentioned before, millions of people have qualified some amount of service for PSLF. Hundreds of thousands have had their debt canceled outright. And every single one of those people has submitted their employer to the government. And so there's this database of everybody that's already been evaluated and already been approved, and in some cases already been rejected. And so if your employer is in this database, you can move on to the next step. If it's a new employer the government's never heard of before or hasn't made a determination or it thinks is ineligible, but you think otherwise, you can continue through here and have the government evaluate your employer. And that's a stopping point. That's one of the things you can do to tell the government you want the waiver. And as long as you've logged in and you've done that step, the process could take 6 months, it could take a year, but eventually you'll get your debt canceled, and you'll get your debt canceled on these special terms. I will come back to that in just a second too, because it has some interplay with certifying your service. But just know that assuming you got the green light here. So for this next conversation, we are assuming you work for an eligible employer and you're ready to move forward. How do you figure out if you need to take extra steps on your loans? So we're back at studentaid.gov, same place. You've logged in, and you can pull up your student aid dashboard, and that will give you this look at all the loans the government knows you own. And that's true for consolidation loans, for loans that are owed directly to the government. That's also true for guaranteed loans or Perkins loans that are owned by schools. So you'll see them all laid out here. In this borrower's case, they've already done a consolidation loan, and that's paid off all these other loans that have $0 balances below. Those are loans like the Perkins loan that wouldn't have counted if you didn't consolidate. So this is a borrower that's done everything right. This is what it'll look like after your consolidation is done. You might need more information. It might seem wonky. It might not be clear based on that view of your dashboard. You can click on View Details and download your student aid data. That will give you a loan by loan description of the loans, when you took them out, what school you went to, who your lender is, who your guarantee agency is, if it's an insured loan. There are signs in that form about how you can figure out whether your loan counts or whether it doesn't. If you're one of those borrowers that just needs more help, again, check out forgivemystudentdebt.org, our website. There are lots of FAQs and a short instructional video about figuring out what type of federal student loan you have. There's more information there. I'm also happy to answer questions in the Q&A later. Let's assume that you have discovered that at least one of your loans doesn't count, that you have a Perkins loan or you have an older federal loan that's guaranteed by the federal government that was made by a bank or Sallie Mae or another private lender. What do you do to make those loans count? I'm going to walk you through how to consolidate, and then I'm going to give you a real warning about how this interacts with this new initiative to cancel student debt for everybody. So first, how do you do it? You go back to studentaid.gov. So we're back at the same education department website. You've already created a login because it's how you've checked whether you have a qualifying loan. You are logged in and you go to consolidate my loan. The government has this form. It's online. You can do it in a single sitting. It's super easy. It takes about 20 minutes. And that lets you take any loans you want and wrap them all into a new direct consolidation loan. I'll give you a warning about what that means. But if you have one of these older loans need to be turned into a new direct consolidation loan to make them qualify for public service loan forgiveness. You have the ability to fill out this form. You select the loans you want to consolidate. You check little boxes next to each loan. And then you read some disclosures. You pick the student loan company you want to handle your loan. You should pick Mohela, M-O-H-E-L-A. That's Mohela. This is the student loan company the government pays to handle the borrower accounts for all public service workers. So getting to Mohela is part of the process. I'll talk about that in a second too. Once you select Mohela, you also have a chance to pick what payment plan you want to enroll in. I mentioned before, income-driven repayment is the engine that powers public service loan forgiveness. When the pause on student loan payments ends, if the pause on student loan payments ends and you need to make payments again, it's better to start in an income-driven payment plan. So you can fill that request out as part of this application. You will not have to make payments if you pick a payment plan until the student loan system starts up again. So if you fill out this application now, you're not going to get a bill in November or December. You will not get a bill any sooner than January. If it gets extended, it will get extended. Picking a payment plan now just protects you in the future. It doesn't require you to start making payments right away. So here's the warning. I'm going to sit with this for a sec. I'm going to try to explain it a couple different ways. I am happy to answer questions about this when we get to the Q&A. Last week, on September 29th, the administration announced that it was closing the door to this new up to $20,000 worth of debt cancellation for anyone that had one of these older loans. But not just any of these older loans that were owned by private creditors still. So some of these older loans are owned by the federal government. These loans were paused when all the other student loans got paused. If the government owns your loans and they paused your payments, you are good to go here. You do not need to worry about getting $10,000 or $20,000 worth of debt cancellation. You can consolidate your loans to pursue public service loan forgiveness. You can wrap them into a loan with your newer loans. No matter what you do is kind of fine. If all you're doing is making loans that are covered by the payment pause count, then you don't need to worry about this. Everything's going to be fine. But if you have one of these older loans that's owned by Navient or Nelnet, for example, those older loans are called commercial FFEL loans, or if you have an older loan that's owned by your school, a Perkins loan, and it wasn't paused during the payment pause, you have to consolidate it to get on track for public service loan forgiveness. And if you combine that with any loans that were paused, because lots of people have both types of loans, 2 million people have both types of loans. If you're one of those 2 million people, you might no longer be eligible to have $10,000 or $20,000 for the debt cancellation. I say may, I say might, because the government hasn't written all the rules for how this is going to work. So I'm giving you a warning now that says that doing everything we told you today to pursue PSLF might make you miss out for $10,000 or $20,000 of the debt cancellation, but it could set you up to have your debts wiped out completely. We are learning more information about how this works every day, and we are going to do a special workshop just for these borrowers to answer a million questions and explain all the guts of this change in policy. We're going to announce that on forgivemystudentdebt.org. We're going to do that at some point, likely not next week, probably the week after, but we're figuring out the date. And we're doing our best to get more information from the Biden administration so that we can give everybody the most accurate, up-to-date information we can. So I'm leaving you with this disclaimer that says, if you consolidate right now and you have both types of loans, you might miss out on $10,000 or $20,000 of the debt cancellation. So you might want to tune into this next workshop to find out more information. If you're a borrower where all of your loans were paused, you can consolidate and not sweat it. If you are a borrower who only has loans that are owned by the federal government, you can consolidate and not sweat it. If you have a borrower who only has loans that are owned by private creditors, so that your loans were never paused and your only loan owner is Navient or Nelnet or a bank, you unfortunately are not ever going to be eligible for $10,000 or $20,000 for the debt cancellation, but it means you can consolidate your loan to pursue PSLF without giving it a second thought, because it's the only door that's open to you. So there are lots of people where this is a really easy decision. That's a quick primer on who those people are. But certainly if you have both of these types of loans and you're trying to figure out how to mix and match them so that you get the most credit possible, tune into our workshop. Likely it's not going to be next week. It's going to be the week after. So likely that's the third week in October. So stay tuned on forgivemystudentdebt.org for more information about when we're going to host that. So now I've done the big scary warning. I've talked about consolidation. It's smooth sailing from here on out. I am now going to talk about how everyone that works in public service needs to raise their hand and show the government that they are trying to pursue the PSLF waiver. And I'm going to repeat one more time. You do not have to have your forms processed by the end of the month. Basically, no one who starts right now is going to have that happen. You don't even have to have submitted these forms yet. You just need to start the process here. But I'm going to walk you through how the whole process works. I'm going to walk you through what it means to show your intent to pursue PSLF. And I am going to talk about some tricks and traps that sometimes trip people up. So we're back here at studentaid.gov. You go back into the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Help Tool, the same place that you looked up whether your employer counts. You match your employer in here, and you get this form. And what the PSLF Help Tool does is it generates a form that you print out and have your employer certify, You write in the dates of employment, or you check the box that says you're still employed. You certify that you work full-time, or you combine multiple part-time jobs. And then you have your employer sign and that verifies that you served that period. And then you submit that form to the Department of Education. If you are one of those borrowers whose employer is not in the database, that means that the help tool doesn't let you automatically generate a populated form that has information about your employer. You can go get a copy of the blank form and fill it out yourself. Requesting the government consider your employer is supposed to be enough to get you on track for the Pslf waiver. We recommend that everybody do both things. So you can go to Mohila's website, just Google Mohila, it'll pop right up. And if you go to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness page for employers, you can find a PDF of the same form, of this same form. And you can print it out and you can fill it out yourself. You can have your employer sign it. And that's like a good double check. You're doing two things here. You're both telling the government to consider your employer. You're also submitting a paper form. Doing both of those things is the best way to make sure that you are doubly sure you're going to get the special treatment of this waiver. But all you need to do to get on track is one of those two things. So where do you send this form? On the most recent version of the form, you will see the address for this company, Mohila. There are older versions of this form out there. They have the wrong information on it. They'll tell you to send to a company called Fed Loan Servicing. That is not correct. That is the government's old contractor. You want to go to Mohila. This is Mohila's address. It is on the Pslf form. It is also on Mohila's website. If you are a current customer of Mohila, you can also electronically submit your document. But that is only open to people that are currently customers of Mohila. So that means that if you are not currently a customer of Mohila, you have to submit it by US mail or by fax. And I know that's crazy in 2022 to have to fax a thing, but this is the government we have. And if you do that, please mail it certified mail, go to the post office in person, get a receipt for your letter so you have something that shows you mailed it in. If you fax it, keep the receipt that prints out confirming delivery of your fax. Just make sure you're keeping documents generally. It's really a good thing to do in case things go sideways. So what happens next? Mohila becomes your student loan company. They assess the number of payments. Eventually, they cancel your debt. For most people, most of the time, this works. I want to flag some things that go wrong, though. And then we're going to do a whole bunch of Q&A. So first, don't do this. If you are filling out your forms and you make a mistake or your employer makes a mistake, please do not do hand corrections. Please do not initial those hand corrections. Legally, this is totally fine. If you're a lawyer, this might even be your habit. But the government's scanners, they read all these forms electronically first, and they freak out when you do this. So having hand corrections is a surefire way to get your form kicked back to you, and you'll have to start the process all the way over. I know it might be a pain to get your employer to fill out a form a second time if there's been a mistake. I promise you, it is much harder to get the federal government's bureaucracy to process this thing a second time than it is for you to deal with your employer's bureaucracy and go through HR one more time. So please just trust me, you don't want to do this. You also might get bad information on forms, on bills, on websites from your student loan company. Don't stress about seeing things that seem inconsistent with what I told you. The information that I provided you today is the correct information as of Tuesday, October 4th. There are old forms and old billing statements and old disclosures and old website language all over the internet. Don't sweat it. What I'm telling you today is correct. Don't miss out because you saw something from your student loan company and it told you to do something else. Also note that this Pslf help tool has a wrinkle. There's a little bug in there that sometimes causes a hard time for people that have these older loans that need to be consolidated. The government may not see that you've made qualifying payments yet, and so it might not let you submit through the form, through the tool to get your form and fill out. You might have to check, no, I haven't made 120 payments to be able to toggle through the form. So just play with these buttons when you get there. Even if it's not exactly right for your circumstance, it just gets you to the form, and you need to get to the form to be able to get credit, to be able to get in line and get the rights that are vested in you under this limited Pslf waiver. Last thing here is payment counts. People are getting statements from their student loan companies with wrong payment counts every single day. Don't worry about this. Don't lose hope. This is just part of the process. Right now, these payment counts are being updated, but they're being updated very slowly. We have heard that there is a backlog of as many as 500,000 public service workers waiting for their payment counts to be updated. So if you get a bill that has wrong information, it's not the end of it. It's probably just the beginning. Be patient. And again, as long as you've taken one of these steps before the end of this month, you've told the government you want your rights under the waiver, and you'll be able to figure all of this stuff out in November and beyond. So one more time, important takeaways. Your deadline to consolidate or to submit forms is the end of this month. You don't need to submit the form. You just need to generate the form and hand it to your employer. So that means that anybody that starts this process anytime in October will have signaled their intent to the government that they want to get public service loan forgiveness and taken a step to be able to get on track. Things go wrong. Sometimes you get bad information. Sometimes forms get lost. If something feels wrong, say something. Don't wait. And you can do that by submitting a complaint directly to the federal government at the Department of Education at studentaid.gov/complaint. If your student loan company has lied to you, if you can't get them to give you information you need, you could submit a complaint about your student loan company to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau at consumerfinance.gov/complaint. That's the regulator for the student loan industry. Also, beware of scams. There are folks everywhere trying to separate you from your money. So just beware that might happen. There are lots of scammers out there. Never pay someone cash if they cold call you and ask you for money to cancel your debt. That is a scam. So I want to end here by flagging one more time this announcement from August that Joe Biden has promised to cancel up to $20,000 of student debt for nearly everyone with a student loan. This is an historic achievement. Over 20 million people will be debt-free as a result of this action, but you have to apply. The application isn't out yet. For most student loan borrowers, you can qualify for this and you can qualify for public service loan forgiveness. You can just do all the things and push in this direction of getting your debt canceled. I mentioned before, there are risks to folks that have two different kinds of loans if you consolidate them both together. I want to say one more time, we are going to have a special webinar just for those borrowers to talk through those risks and to talk about what information we have right now. That's not going to be this week. It's not going to be next week. It's likely going to be the week after that. And go to forgivemystudentdebt.org to learn more about the timing of that and to get lots and lots of resources about all of the information that I've shared today. So with that, we are going to do as many questions as we have time for here. And also there are dozens and dozens of FAQs on forgivemystudentdebt.org. So if we don't get to your question, don't worry. There's probably an answer already on the internet.
Thanks, Mike. That was amazing. My name's Amy Salata. I'm the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center, and I'm just helping out with questions tonight. So our first question, I think some people are having trouble with the two programs that we talked about tonight and conflating them a bit. So could you very briefly review what Pslf is and under the waiver, and then how that differs from the cancellation announcement and how they might interact with one another?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to do the short version of this, but again, there's lots of information on forgivemystudentdebt.org that does this very slowly and patiently in a way that can help you follow along. I know I used a lot of jargon tonight, and the student loan speak can be super confusing. It doesn't need to be this complicated, but unfortunately it is. So with that being said, going back to 2007, people that work in public service have a right to get their debt canceled based on their public service work. And if you certify that you've worked in public service for 10 years, and you take advantage of this limited opportunity, you might be able to get your debt canceled outright right now, but it's all or nothing. You don't get any debt relief under public service loan forgiveness unless you've worked for 10 years. You can get credit towards future debt relief, but you have to keep working in public service and making payments to get all the way there. In August, Joe Biden announced something different. Anybody qualifies for this. It doesn't matter where you work. It doesn't matter whether you've been making payments on your loans. It doesn't matter if you're in default on your loans. It doesn't matter if you're a parent. It doesn't matter if you're a grad student or an undergrad. Everybody that has a loan that is owned by the federal government, so everybody that was covered by the payment pause, has a right to get their debt canceled, either $10,000 for folks that did not use a Pell Grant to pay for college, or $20,000 for folks that did use a Pell Grant to pay for college. And that has to do with your own Pell Grant status. So if you're a parent and you used a Pell Grant back when you went to college, you get $20,000 of debt cancellation off of your parent loan. If you are a student who used a Pell Grant when you went to college, you get up to $20,000 worth of debt cancellation off of your student loans. Both parents and students from the same household can qualify for this. So you could have $40,000 of the debt cancellation if you used a Pell Grant and your parent used a Pell Grant and you both had your own loans.
Amazing. Thanks, Mike. And what about for Pslf? Is it possible for people who are currently in default or who were in default before to get Pslf?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a wrinkle to this, as there is often here. The time you were in default doesn't count towards public service loan forgiveness. The only times that count are when you're not in default and enrolled in a payment plan and making payments, regardless of what those payments are, under what payment plan they are under. So if you have gotten out of defaults, all of your time before you defaulted can count. All of your time after you got out of defaults can count. As long as you were making payments, the months that you missed payments before you defaulted don't count. The time you spent in default doesn't count. But basically, any other time you have a student loan that's an open loan, as long as you were making payments, that counts.
Thank you. And what about for forbearances under Pslf, the waiver? How would forbearances work, maybe?
So for folks that are concerned about how to get forbearances counted, we do have lots of information on forgivemystudentdebt.org about this. The Biden administration in April of last year announced a separate program for people that want to get credit towards deferments and forbearances who may have used them instead of using income-driven repayment because they were told to by their student loan company or they didn't know any better. The government has mismanaged the student loan program to such an extraordinary degree over the past 20 years that millions of people were enrolled in forbearances for years at a time. And they did that instead of being in a qualifying payment plan. And that means they missed out on credit towards Pslf. It means they missed out on credit towards IDR. The government said that if you used a forbearance for 12 months consecutively or for 36 months cumulatively, but in shorter stints, the government will count those periods of forbearance or deferment towards public service loan forgiveness with one exception. And that one exception is time that you went back to school. So if you used an in-school deferment for a long period of time, that's not going to count. But otherwise, if you deferred your loans due to economic hardship, or if you put your loan in forbearance due to financial hardship, and you did it for a long period of time, those long-term forbearances are going to count. There's also a way, if you were misled by your student loan company, to tell the government that and get shorter periods of forbearance to count. But to do that, you need to follow some specific steps to be able to raise your hand and say, I was misled. There's more information about how to do that in the frequently asked questions on forgivemystudentdebt.org.
Thanks, Mike. Can you get Pslf or Biden's debt cancellation if you have a private loan or if you've refinanced your loan?
So generally, the answer to that is no. Private student loans are not eligible. And once you refinance your student loan into a private loan made by SoFi or Navient, those private loans are no longer eligible. There's good news for folks that refinanced during the pandemic, though. You can't undo your refinance, but you can get your money back that you paid the federal government to pay off your old loan. And you do that by what's called reinstating your loan. And you have a right to do that for any loan that was paid off or any voluntary payments you made at all, even if it was just making extra payments since March of 2020. So if you went to SoFi and refinanced your loan in 2021, you have a right to go to the federal government. You can call the student loan company you had at the time, and you can ask the federal government to reinstate your loan up to the amount that you'd expect to get canceled, whether that's $10,000 or $20,000. And the government will write you a check and mail it to you. And you will have a $10,000 or $20,000 balance owed on that loan that will be eligible to be canceled. I will offer a couple different words of warning here. That's not going to do anything to your private loan unless you then send that check to your private lender. You still owe your private loan. That is also not going to work immediately. The government doesn't even have a form up yet to get that broad debt cancellation. So keep that money until you see a $0 balance, because you are on the hook for a loan that's been reinstated. But there is a way forward here. You can request $10,000 or $20,000 back from the government and then have that balance canceled. And that's basically how you benefit if you've refinanced your loan. But that's only true for people that have done that during the pandemic, people that have refinanced their loan into a private loan since March of 2020.
Thanks, Mike. We are getting so many good questions tonight, and we're trying to get to as many as possible. I think we have a few more minutes to take a few more. So there was a lot of talk about different types of loans and what people need to pay attention to if they are going to seek PSLF under the waiver, or if they need to consider consolidating. But most people's interaction with their loans is with their servicer. So a lot of people are asking questions about different servicers and like what it means if they have a particular servicer. So how do people find out what type of loans they have, and like how do they know if they need to consolidate?
Again, I'm going to keep plugging forgivemystudentdebt.org because it's fantastic. There is a video on how to figure out what kind of loans you have. It takes a couple minutes. Watch it. It walks through a bit slower, a bit more clearly, a bit less rushed, the set of steps that we talked about a few minutes ago about going to studentaid.gov, going to your student loan dashboard, looking at your student loan information, and figuring out whether any of your loans say FFEL or guaranteed or Perkins. And those are the signs that you have a loan that you need to consolidate. And then there's a separate video on forgivemystudentdebt.org that walks you through how to actually go step by step and consolidate those loans, turn them into a new direct consolidation loan, and then they're eligible for you to certify your SOAS.
Thanks, Mike. And what can people do if they're having trouble getting their PSLF form signed by a previous employer?
So I'm going to give a word of warning about this. If you have a previous employer that's just tough to get a hold of, I would deal with that directly with your employer and try your very best to get your employer to sign that form. There are instructions on the PSLF form about how to attest that you worked in public service for an organization that doesn't exist or is no longer accessible. There is a very long backlog to have those forms processed. You could do it, especially if your prior employer is closed and there's no records. You have no choice but to do it. But that process takes a long time, and you are just going to be sitting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And I would strongly recommend you do everything in your power to track down that old employer and have them sign your form, unless the records don't exist anymore and you have no other choice.
Thanks, Mike. And can you mention the 4 IDR plans that are eligible for PSLF?
Yeah, so there are 4 and about to be a 5th. But the 4 IDR plans that are eligible, that's income-driven repayment plans, are income contingent repayment, which is a thing that's existed since the early 90s, income-based repayment, which was created at the end of the Bush administration, pay-as-you-earn, which is an Obama administration initiative, and that's not available to a lot of people, and then revised pay-as-you-earn that was created in 2015. That's the most recent of these. And so that's a gobbledygook. It's a lot of alphabet soup there. But those are the 4 programs that exist right now. ICR, IBR, PAYE, or REPAYE, and there's about to be number 5. So the Biden administration has announced that an even more generous 5th income-driven repayment plan is going to be available to borrowers starting in January. For people that only have undergrad debt, that's going to cut your monthly payment in half. So stay tuned. It's also going to cancel a lot of people's interest in real time every month. So it'll be a really good deal when it becomes available, but you won't be able to sign up for that until January at the absolute earliest. So stay tuned.
Amazing. Thanks, Mike. And to maybe close this out, can you tell us what we need to do by October 31st and where to send our PSLF forms?
Yeah, so by October 31st, you have to do something to raise your hand and tell the government that you want to get PSLF under this waiver. And that something can be going to the PSLF help tool and putting in your employer and having the government tell you, we don't have a match, we need to process this. That's something. As long as you were logged in to studentaid.gov when you did that, you did a thing. That also can include going into the PSLF help tool and generating a form. Even if your employer hasn't gotten it back to you and you haven't been able to submit it yet, as long as you have a matched employer and you've generated that form, that's a thing. That means you've raised your hand and said you want to pursue PSLF. Starting the consolidation process, so going through that 20-minute consolidate your loans process, that's another thing that shows the government you want to pursue public service loan forgiveness. If you're a consolidating borrower, though, we recommend you do 2 of those things. Do your consolidation and also do one of the other things to verify an employer. the system is kind of a mess. Paperwork gets lost. These servicers get confused. It's better to do more than less. But the rules say just do one of those things and you're in line. And even if it takes 6 months or a year to process, you're going to get the rights and protections we talked about today. Where do you send your form? I guess we can close out with where do you send your form? Send your form to Mohila. Mohila is the student loan company that's responsible for administering the public service loan forgiveness program. The new public service loan forgiveness forms have the address on there. If you are currently a Mohila customer, you can upload those electronically. If not, you have to send them by snail mail or by fax. Keep a receipt if you do either of those things.
Thanks, Mike.
And thanks everybody for joining us. We are going to have more of these workshops in the month of August. Everybody that needs information is going to get it, and everyone that can get canceled should. And please tune back in, not next week, but the week after, if you are one of those borrowers that has a bunch of different kinds of loans and need to figure out how to make heads or tails of these changes. So thanks again for joining. Thank you, Amy, for asking questions. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.